Hi, Lorene Smith from Tourmaline and Time Quilts here. I'm here to talk to you today a little bit about fabric cutting and making accurate cuts. We all worry about having the perfect size pieces, and sometimes we don't think so much about the fact that our cutting really has just as much to do with those perfect squares and perfect pieces as does that 1/4 inch seam we all strive to achieve. So let's talk a little bit about how you can make sure that you get more accurate cutting. So first and foremost, let's talk about your rulers you're using. One, most of us, unless you're using a really large piece of fabric, your most accurate cutting is going to come from your ruler, not from your mat. So if you're measuring from your mat, start measuring from your ruler instead. That's step number one. Step number two is making sure that you can read what's on your ruler so that you know where you're going. Now, if you're making multiple cuts of the same thing, so say you're making strip quilts and you're always using a 2.5 inch cut. Well, on this handy dandy ruler here, it's a 2.5 inches from here to here, which is great, but there's lots of other dark black lines that I'm going to see going along here. So I may choose to use either painter's tape because it pulls off easily, or washi tape. This is glow line tape. It's a really small tape, and the nice thing about the glow line as opposed to, say, the painter's tape is the painter's tape is very opaque. The glow line tape, once you find to the end of it, happens to be relatively transparent, so you can still see through it, so you can see where your line is. So those are two things. Make sure you can see your lines and you know where you're cutting, because most designers will give you a little extra fabric for those oops cuts, but you want to not have too many of those. So marking your lines is really a good place to start, especially if you're making multiple cuts. It's worth that little extra time. Now, the next thing to talk about is where do you cut when you're looking at your lines. Now, you've got your inside line. So say I'm cutting from this direction, this way. This is my inside line. This is the outside line. And then the black line in the middle is exactly the line. Okay? Well, we would rather cut a little large than a little small. So always make sure, if you can, that your line is at least where you want it, okay? You want these close, but it's better to trim down after you've pieced it than to not have a piece big enough. Sometimes that's where we end up using that scant 1/4 inch. So if you can get the black line or whichever line you're using directly on the edge of your fabric, that's a good start. So you always want to start with a clean edge of your fabric and go from there. The last piece here of accurate quilting cutting is making sure that your ruler doesn't slide. So there are different ways to do this. There are different types of rulers here, and I'm going to give you some examples. Omni and Olipfa make versions that have a little edge piece here that will prevent yours from sliding off the edge. Okay, so it's going to catch. You'll note that this particular ruler here, I have some of that glow line tape on it, so you can see right through it to mark the edge that I was using. So those are some options to make sure, and that's going to keep it from sliding around. Another option that you can use here, Creative Grids, theirs have these patented little dots here that actually grip the fabric. Say you're not in the mood to buy new rulers, you want to use the ones you have. There are things you can buy, such as handy grips are one variety. There's different manufacturers, but what they have in here, they're little stickers that you can put on the back side, and they have this really rough surface to them, so it's going to, again, prevent it from sliding on your fabric. When all else fails, and you really want to make sure it doesn't go anywhere, even if you've used all these others, get your workout in, you can use a weight. And that weight will help, once you put it down, it's going to help keep that end stationary. So There are multiple ways to help make sure that your ruler stays still, which will help your cut. Now, the other piece is that a lot of us want to cut quickly, which is great. But if you're cutting more than one piece at a time, one thing to look at is your rotary cutter and how much can your rotary cutter handle. A 60 millimeter rotary cutter can handle up to 8 layers, but keep in mind as it goes down, you're going to lose accuracy as you get toward the bottom. If you're using a 45 millimeter, it can use 6 layers of fabric. So if you're trying to cut more than that, your accuracy is definitely going to come down from there. So let's show you how it's done. Pulling out my 60 millimeter here, only because I like the big cuts it gives me. And if you're not getting big and accurate cuts to it, in that case, it's time to change that blade, something none of us like to do. So I have a nice clean edge here on this side. I'm going to line it up just so I have something relatively straight here so that you guys can see it. I'm going to line it up on an edge. It doesn't matter which one because I am going to use my ruler and not my mat to tell me where to go. Okay, so in here I flattened my fabric out. One thing when you do your cuts, you want to make sure when your fabric comes off the bolt, sometimes it's a little wonky, so you want to make sure you square it up. How you'll know if it's good and square is that this will fold easily and you won't have any sort of, I'll hold it straight for you. You see there's no real wiggles or warps in that. Now you know you've lined it up straight. Okay, so we're going to take that line that I had and put it down here, and again, make sure you even up your lines. Okay, move some of this out of the way. Here's my cutting instructions. So we're going to level this out. We're going to make sure that both sides, because I'll cut 2 at a time, that's typically what I do, and that way they're even. Again, lay it out here. And so one of my first cuts here is going to be a 2.5 inch cut is what I'll need here. Line it up straight. I'm going to put my handy dandy ruler down. I'm going 2.5 inches. So I'm going to measure from this side. I'm going to flip it over so that this is my 2.5 inch line. I'm going to line it up so that the black line for that 2.5 inches is directly on the edge of my fabric. I don't trust myself. I use both the grips and a weight. Okay, and we're going to cut our fabric here. And you know, I'm not pushing hard. It's gliding nicely. Means my blade is sharp because I just changed it. This pulls away nicely. And I have my 2.5 inch strip, and it's really, really accurate. So when we get through with this, we'll talk a little bit about how you organize all those strips you're cutting once you get them cut. Hope this helps you get more accurate quilt cutting. Happy quilting!